Welcome to Goose Live. My name is Charlie Stivers. I am your host today. I am also the publisher of Goose Magazine, and we talk all things Bitcoin, crypto, digital assets, blockchain technology. We make it easy for beginners to get started, but also have some juicy nuggets and good information about where you can find some great information, learn more about all this technology, and have fun with it. And I believe wholeheartedly in the basics, the fundamentals, and where all this began was with Bitcoin. So today's show is going to be about Bitcoin, and we have a special guest today, my Bitcoin mentor. I've plugged into a lot of groups with him and learned more and more about the whole Bitcoin blockchain and what's building on top of it, which is what's really exciting and where that can really affect our lives as consumers, people who just want to do business and maybe bypass the government and centralized institutions. So we'll be right back. And here's our trailer, and I'll introduce our guest. All right, and we're back. One thing I really like about that intro is you can pretty much substitute out crypto and Bitcoin, and it still very much applies. And I think you're going to get a better grasp today of the technology that's being built on top of the Bitcoin network that they also call the Lightning Network. And it's fascinating to see from an investor standpoint where this is all headed, because if you've been paying attention to the news, the SEC is basically calling everything in crypto a security except Bitcoin. So right now we're seeing a lot of venture capital or VC funds dumping money into this Lightning Network because that to them is their safe play, safe bet for really embracing this technology and how quickly it's growing and is going to, again, just be an evolution of the internet. But, and the beginning of that video, it comes down to us doing business with each other, buying a, $5 or $10 coffee and being able to pay for it immediately. And the hope is also, everyone's cutting back. So vendors and businesses are looking for ways to cut costs. So what really blew my mind was how inexpensive it is to do business on the blockchain, on the Lightning Network specifically. So we're going to share some stories today of how we were able to help some 7th and 8th graders at an entrepreneur fair in Denver. And then real quick, I got to make a small plug for the magazine. And so I'm the publisher of GOOSE magazine. And again, I believe in the basics. So the first article we have here is, who is Satoshi Nakamoto? It's not displaying perfectly, but there we go. And he is the person, he or she, they, that started Bitcoin as a result of the 2007-2008 banking and credit crisis. So it started this huge movement, and look at where we are today. Over half of the value of the whole cryptocurrency market is the Bitcoin valuation. So, there's a big focus on what Bitcoin's doing, the Lightning Network, and everyone that's developing on it. So I'm going to introduce our guest today, and his name is the Bitcoin mentor, or Mark. And I've been, it's been about almost 2 years since we've met, just through the Denver market. And it's neat to see where we come, but I've learned a lot from you, so I'm grateful for that. And now we get to dig more and more into the Lightning Network, which is super exciting just because I'm a technology geek. But Mark, thanks for joining us here today.
Hey, it's great to be here, Charlie. I love, how much I love talking about the Lightning Network and Bitcoin. So it won't probably be like pulling teeth.
I think people will dig it. And what I like about you is you help keep it simple. And I think a lot of people appreciate that, and it's much needed. And just like anything technology, you pick it up more and more with repetition. So I keep paying attention, and I stay involved.
So do I. I mean, it's a constant learning process, right? I mean, we're in school, and in some respects, I feel like with Bitcoin and with Lightning Network, we're in kindergarten all the time, and we never advance past first grade, but there's so much to learn. So delighted to be here today, and hopefully we can share a few nuggets that will give people some insights and better understand this new technology. Because as you said in the intro, it's truly amazing.
Yeah. One kind of funny headline today, I don't know if you caught this, but there's a rumor going around that the Bitcoin white paper was installed on Apple devices since 2018?
A later edition of Macs. Yes. And I've been a Mac user for a long time. I saw that. I thought that was kind of interesting. I mean, ultimately, I'm not sure what that all means, but in the Bitcoin community, it's a big deal.
It is. So in honor of today, I wore this shirt.
There you go. All right.
Yeah. And so part of the rumors going around, they're like, ooh, is Steve Jobs potentially Satoshi Nakamoto?
Yeah. I don't think so.
I don't think so either. But I thought that was kind of funny too, to just have fun with this all. And, it would have been interesting if that came out on April 1st, but
that would have been appropriate.
Right. Well, let's dig in a little bit. You kind of position Bitcoin beginnings with, first we have to understand our banking system and the flaws. So let's dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, most people when they ask about what's Bitcoin, I'll start with, well, okay, do you understand what money is? It seems like an easy question to answer because we work with it every day, but it's actually darn hard. So there's money, the banking system, and even the financial system, which is slightly different. So my background really was a banking lawyer, and I was a securities litigator before I ultimately ended up working as a coach and trainer for many years, mostly for lawyers and accountants. And so the way money works today, most people know probably who are watching this show, is it's fiat, meaning it's by decree. So, but it didn't start out that way. Money used to be backed by gold, which was a commodity that was you couldn't just manufacture it easily. And when you look through the history of money, you found that most communities and most civilizations tended to fall into using something that was hard to duplicate. Otherwise, it was easy to counterfeit. So the banking system, the way I describe it to people just as a shorthand, is that the banking system and our monetary system, and we're seeing a little of that with SVB, the Silicon Valley Bank, some of the bank failures. A lot of people may not know this, but they had some problems with the bond market in the UK last fall. All of these things are showing that the system is starting to break. And that's relevant because we're talking about Lightning today, which is actually a monetary network and system. But most people don't realize that the banking system and the financial system is probably 200 times worse than you can imagine. Now, we could spend the whole show going through all those details, but I don't really want to depress people because it doesn't matter. We can't change what's already happened. I think the best quote, and I'll probably butcher it a little bit, but it was by Henry Ford, who said, "I do believe that if the people of our country understood the banking and monetary system, there'd be a revolution by morning." I think that's still true. And I think because banking is now, what happened with Silicon Valley Bank is you could actually remove millions of dollars in seconds from your phone. Whereas the old school banking system assumed you had to go down to a branch, you had to fill out a slip, you had to wait in line, and it was only during banking hours. Well, that's not what Silicon Valley Bank was about. And they had very large venture-funded companies who moved $40 billion, I don't remember the exact number, out of there in like a day. And that's just not your grandfather or even your father's or even my banking network from what I grew up with. So that was the banking system and the financial system. Add to that, you and I talked about this before we got going on the live show, the number of laws and regulations that govern the current banking system are staggering. I'm sure it's in the thousands of pages, probably in the tens of thousands of pages between the actual laws that are in the statutes and then something that's passed after that, which is regulations that are usually passed by, quote, the regulators, people like the Fed or the OCC, or there's a number of different groups.
Bank of International Settlements on the global.
Exactly. Well, that's just the U.S. regulatory system.
Yeah.
Then you have the global regulatory system, which is the Bank of International Settlements, and all that is the central bank of central banks.
Right.
So all central banks around the world, for the most part, are going to ultimately be a member of the Bank of International Settlements. So there's a lot of word salads and three-letter agencies, and really just trying to keep track of it all. I don't blame it. Nobody should really bother to spend a lot of time with it, but it's so bad that I think people are starting to realize that there are some risks to putting money in the bank. And this is the one important point I want to make. I've asked this of a lot of people. I think we did this with the middle schoolers. How many think that when you put money in a bank, that money is yours? And I think most people would say yes. And the sad news is it's not. You are making the loan to the bank, and then you have no control over what that bank does with your money. That's bad enough. Then, because of the nature of what those banks are allowed to do with the money, they can turn right around and, I'm going to say, gamble with it, because essentially what most banks are today, and this was an article written by Lynn Alden, fantastic material that she puts out, but she says that basically they're highly leveraged bond funds. Now, the bonds are usually U.S. Treasuries. That's a good thing. But if they're long dated Treasuries and you want to get your money out tomorrow, they don't have the money in the bank. And so the current monetary system and banking system allows for, and it's called fractional reserve banking. And that is an inherently unstable system that's starting to show the cracks almost by the day. So Bitcoin came as an answer to that very problem, which was the banking system as we know it today.
Absolutely. And, he started working on it in 2009. He
started working on it. I would suspect, no one knows for sure. We don't know if it's a he, she, or they, as you said.
Right.
It actually started to operate on January 3rd of 2009. He wrote the white paper on Halloween in 2008, which is literally in the throes of the banking system. And I suspect he'd been working on it all year. I think there are even emails that show, he was interacting with people and asking about it. So yeah, he'd been working on it. And really what people need to understand even about Bitcoin is it was an accumulation of about 5 or 6 different things. He had to solve the Byzantine generals problem, which nobody needs to worry about. He had to solve the double spend problem. When you're dealing with digital anything, how do you keep somebody from just copying it? Well, he solved that problem using something called proof of work. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So he had to work on a number of different things. He also realized that the current system was a fractional reserve system that was designed, this is my opinion, not anyone else's, it was designed to not work eventually. And we're coming to sort of the natural or logical conclusion of that system, because once you give anybody, I don't know if you weren't in the classroom, we taught this to 7th and 8th graders. And I said, hey, what would you do if you had a money printer in your bedroom? And of course, everybody's just gleefully thinking about all the things they're going to do with it. Well, that's essentially what the central bank of every country in the world has, is a money printer. They give it fancy names, but that's what it is. And there isn't a human being on the planet that's not going to abuse that at some point. It's the nature of giving somebody that kind of power over finance. So to the detriment of everybody else. So that's our current monetary system. Whereas Bitcoin, obviously fixed supply, it's really a new form of digital money that everybody will be using. So my kids, your kids, grandkids, they won't probably know much about bank accounts, would be my guess. Or they'll think their bank account is on a phone. They won't actually think about going into a branch and getting checkbooks. Today, I'm an absolute, what's the right word? Neanderthal, right? I'm a dinosaur because I still write checks.
You still write checks at the grocery store that we have to wait on?
No, not at the grocery store. I mean, they're more for, people that I'm sending checks to that are out of state.
Right.
One form or another.
I always smirk when you're stuck behind someone in the grocery store that it's usually
still uses checks.
Yep. And it's cute. Yep. And I mean, that's really how we have to look at today. Can you imagine, grimacing at someone who's, in their 60s or 70s, still doing it the old way, and someone just walks by, scan a QR code or do the touch tap, and they're off with their goods.
Well, and again, I mean, you're hitting on it. So Lightning, which we'll get to, is developing. There's so many companies developing on the Lightning layer, which is a payment network, which is an alternative set of rails from what we use, let's say, when we use our credit cards and our debit cards or our cash apps or our Venmos, okay? All of that's on the old US banking system or rails. It's good to think of it almost as an old railroad system. And I think it would be actually good to think of the current US rails, even though you can still, use Venmo or tap to pay. It's built on basically the 1800s technology or even 1900s technology. that's very slow, very inefficient, takes forever to settle, and ultimately is not to the benefit, as you said at the outset of the show. It's not good for merchants whose margins are under attack. So, Bitcoin, to me, when people ask, okay, well, what is it? Usually if I'm feeling a little bit frisky, I'll go, well, which Bitcoin are we talking about? Are we talking about the Bitcoin that is really volatile and bounces up and down, and you never know what it's going to be from one day to the next? Or are we talking about the network and the protocol that are bulletproof, bomb-proof, never been hacked, on a constant upward trajectory from the day it came out in January of 2009, and continues to be the most secure, decentralized, meaning it's not controlled by government, monetary network that's ever existed? And it's had an uptime of something like 99.98%. I mean, it's literally got a network of computers that have never been hacked, and even the Department of Defense for the United States of America can't say that. So when they say, well, what is Bitcoin? Well, which one are we talking about? And of course, we're going to talk more about that. The monetary network and the protocol, which is the base layer, which is Bitcoin, and then built on top of that is the Lightning Network. And I think even by as early as the end of this year, we're going to see a lot more businesses and merchants who are going to start adopting it, because as you said, rather than me charging something with my credit card and the merchant paying 4%, you can use Lightning and pay as little as almost nothing, or maybe 1% if you want to convert it all back into dollars. But make no mistake, you're using a different set of rails that are not controlled by the government and that are actually infinitely more reliable and actually better for the environment, which I suspect we'll get into a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I showed a video 2 weeks ago of the group down in El Salvador who the whole POS system at the grocery store was set up on Lightning and paid for his groceries literally in a flash. And it's just a really cool real life example. But what I also convey to people, mostly our watchers are here in the US, is we need to really look outside of our bubble and think about these people in third world countries. And I love how, we always say Bitcoin can reach places around the world that fiat money cannot. Exactly. That's a perfect example of it.
Yeah, Elise Colleen, actually, I think is the first place I heard that said, and it's powerful. And for those who are interested, when you start to study large organizations that are global, like the IMF, which stands for the International Monetary Fund, or the World Bank, we tend to think, okay, those are pretty good organizations. They're trying to help these poor countries. Well, I wish that were true. I think when you read Alex Gladstein's book, which is called Check Your Financial Privilege, you start to realize that it allows rich countries to exploit poor countries. And that's no different than what the US dollar system is doing, because essentially the US banking system allows the wealthy, i.e. the bankers and the central bankers and even the government, to take from the poor and give to the rich. And I think most people probably have the opposite view, which is I sort of understand why people might have that view, but it's 180 degrees off, which is why I think what you're doing is really powerful, both the magazine and this show, because you're trying to actually close some really important knowledge gaps, because you don't learn this in school at any stage.
Yeah. Can you touch on, there's tons of misconceptions out there. Can you touch on a few of those to maybe clear up some of the muddy water, so to speak?
Wow. Where do we start? One of the ones we talked about was
energy.
Yeah. So the energy one is unbelievable. I have started, I haven't finished this article. I've written about 20 articles for Bitcoin Magazine, but none on this topic, but I read constantly about Bitcoin mining and energy, and really take out the word Bitcoin mining and think in terms of something called proof of work. And what makes that so amazing, everyone says, oh, Bitcoin wastes energy. No, it doesn't waste an absolute ounce of it. It uses every joule of energy. Well, here's the way it works. First, you find an energy source, which then gets converted into electricity, which then gets turned into something called a hash, which is a technical term that only cryptographers can appreciate, which then gets turned into bits or digits on a computer screen, okay, in something which is this immutable ledger, which is the Bitcoin ledger. But imagine an industry that sought out plentiful sources of energy like, let me give you I'm reading, stranded energy. So there's all kinds of stranded energy in the world that's just sitting there, but fortunately, proof of work starts to actually make good use of that. Wasted energy, surplus energy, excess energy that's produced by grids in every state in the United States, landfill waste gas, which is probably one of the biggest producers of methane, which is one of the leading contributors. If you're going to try and solve climate change and you don't address methane as your first, second, and third move, you don't understand the problem. Okay. Mm-hmm. So landfill waste gas, there's a company called Vespine that's involved in that. There's used cooking oil. I've been trying to donate 2 Bitcoin miners to a place called Bitcoin Lake, which is Lake Atalon in Guatemala, where they're reclaiming and reusing used cooking oil, putting it into a generator and running Bitcoin miners off of it. Hydropower all over the world. I mean, places that have yet to be discovered, but the places that are well known are Iceland, China, Canada. All these places have all kinds of hydropower. That's just water running downhill. That's not, if it doesn't get captured and turned into energy, okay, well, it doesn't, but it's a missed opportunity. Human waste is actually being turned into electricity, which is then turned into Bitcoin mining or to hash power. Pig waste in Mexico. Cow manure, if you can believe it or not, is another one for an Irish dairy farmer. Waste from a tapioca plant in Thailand. Solar, wind, these are the more common ones, right? Nuclear, which I think we're hoping, at least I hope it makes a comeback. And it's perhaps Bitcoin mining and proof of work specifically is probably the single best industry at mitigating methane known to the human race. So it gets really frustrating, right, when we hear all these negativity. And then leaving aside the energy piece, one of the bigger environmental problems in our country is waste tires. So in Colorado, I don't know if you know this, Charlie, we have a huge pile of waste tires. I forget the town that it's in. It's not very far from Denver, less than 100 miles, but it's literally like 300,000 of these tires. There's actually a waste tire plant in North Carolina that basically turns all of that into its component parts, uses whatever electricity or power or energy is involved in that process to turn into electricity, which then runs miners. So it's literally cleaning up waste tires. In the unique nature of proof of work and specifically Bitcoin mining is you can bring those machines to wherever the source of the energy is, even if it's a remote river running in the backwaters of in a place that's never been developed in Uganda. And so what all of this does, it turns Bitcoin mining and specifically proof of work into the buyer of first resort, the buyer of last resort, and even the buyer of only resort. And the best part of it is it requires no state subsidies or tax breaks as incentives, because there's a financial incentive by these Bitcoin miners and mining companies, some of which are publicly traded, some of which are just, people running something in their house as a space heater. Okay, there are literally people using Bitcoin miners as space heaters. So you take all of this together, like I've just listed, and you're like, why are people crapping all over this technology? It is literally the solution to the problem, not the source of the problem. So when you hear people like, Elizabeth Warren, beating on it, you have to just kind of shake your head and you go, okay, well, it's amazing how far ignorance can go. So those are just some of the ways that proof of work mining is just a breakthrough technology that also happens to be the fuel for the world's first digitally native money that has literally never been hacked.
Yeah. And you bring up some good points. I don't know if you saw the video from Greenpeace, just bashing all this stuff. But
funded by a competitor of Bitcoin, Tron or
right.
Whatever it is. I mean, once people understand and follow the money, they start to understand a lot of what's going on. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yeah.
Yeah, but to sum up like what you're talking about there, the way that you look at this is it's causing more and more innovation in how we can be more efficient, more clean with our energy sources.
Right.
So it's a really good example. All of those are. And the other thing that I think you'll dig, I went to one of the other local meetup groups, and there was a gentleman there that actually sets up modular mining trailers, and he taps into rural areas that have a surplus of energy.
Sure.
So, and it's also generating, pun intended, more jobs in the area. And so that's the other piece of the puzzle that people need to look at.
In fact, after the show's over, I want to find out more about where that is, because I have a very good friend of mine who's always trying to help rural areas and towns in Colorado. And I think it would be perfectly suited for places that actually have a source of energy and they don't know what to do. I also, because I'm a huge fan of farmers, particularly restorative farmers and those who use greenhouses, because the source of heat can be used to actually grow our food. So there's this real beautiful kind of a circular loop of ways to use, even though the only waste, just for the record, Bitcoin mining does not produce any waste at all to the environment. Just to be clear, it produces waste heat. The electrical source of the energy might produce greenhouse gases, which it's cleaning up. But the actual machines are basically servers, just like Google needs servers for them to work, just like Facebook needs servers for them to work, just like Amazon needs servers to make them work. Well, the thing that most frustrates me is I think the total energy usage of Bitcoin is like either 0.16% or it's 0.016%. It's easily a rounding error compared to the Department of Defense, the actual US banking systems, any of these other places. Their use of energy dwarfs any use by, these Bitcoin miners. And it's very clear that the current regime, which is not just the monetary system and the bankers, it's the government, they're threatened by it.
Yeah.
Even though, obviously, we live in Colorado, even though it would be an incredible benefit to the state if we were to plug in a miner everywhere there's stranded energy, because the choice is, okay, send a flare up into the atmosphere with all this methane, which is something like, 200 times worse, I think, than CO2, or capture it all, put it in electricity, turn it into Bitcoin. And that Bitcoin, the nature of it is you're literally taking real world energy and producing something which is a bit of data, in this case, money, that literally can't be hacked and doesn't lose. The second law of thermodynamics, it doesn't lose any of the energy. It's locked in there forever. And all of a sudden, you've got something that is truly breakthrough, that everyone should be falling over themselves saying, okay, how do we figure this into if you're a state regulator or state governor, how do I add this to our balance sheet? How do I do this to make us more energy independent? How do I use this same technology to clean up our environment as much as possible? And unfortunately, those conversations aren't happening enough in corporate media environments for obvious reasons, which is why it's great that, we have outlets like you've got here.
Yeah, we could make a whole show just on that.
We could.
But some really strong points there.
Yep.
I'm going to take a quick break, but when we come back, let's talk a little bit about the Bitcoin community, some developments tied into Lightning, and then share the story of our experience with the middle schoolers.
Okay.
And we're back. Did you catch the one image of our middle school day?
Yeah.
I
did. That's awesome.
That's
They
some
had
good
fun.
memories.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it was so cool to see how excited
Kids
Hey,
are so
Mr.
naturally gravitate to this technology.
Oh, yeah.
I'll say this: I'm a dinosaur. You're not, but I'm a dinosaur when it comes to some of this stuff. I mean, I think young, but it's still amazing. Most of my peer group, they're still distrustful, but
Yes.
they loved it. The 7th and 8th
Yeah.
graders loved it. So
I wouldn't be surprised if I say in my sleep, "Hey, Mister, I accept Bitcoin." That was pretty cute to hear that over and over that day. But yeah, so let's touch on a little bit about, in the intro video, I talk about how crypto Bitcoin community is first. Share with us a little bit of your perspective of the Bitcoin community.
Well, I find that the Bitcoin community is all I'm really familiar with. It's not that I don't know that other cryptos are out there, but it's the one that I know. And it's an amazing community because they're very generous with their time. They'll show you how to take possession of your private keys. And for those of you who don't know what that is, find somebody who's a Bitcoiner and have them kind of hold your hand through the process, because it gives you a form of ownership of property. And this is speaking as a former lawyer, that literally didn't exist until the creation of Bitcoin. And it's true with other cryptos as well, but it's really Bitcoin is the one that people, I think, view as a potential digital asset and perhaps someday a reserve asset, if not a reserve currency. So the community is extraordinarily vibrant. I think at this point, there's 220 million, maybe 30 million people who now either own Bitcoin or maybe it's crypto. I don't know if that's, one versus the other. And it's growing stronger every day. So there are probably meetups for those who are watching this and they're wondering how to get involved and meet more people. There's almost usually a meetup in every town. And if there isn't, what I would say to anybody is start your own group in your own town. And there are definitely a large network that you can tap into that are out there. And, the thing that they believe very strongly is that this is the future of, how you're going to share value over the internet. In fact, you remember the phrase voice over internet protocol, VoIP? In the early days, the quality of that sucked. Well, Bitcoin is MOIP, money over the internet protocol.
Nice.
All right. And it's still early days. So I think VoIP started in the 90s somewhere, and it was pretty poor. It's probably we're about there with MOIP, money over the internet, and that's where the Lightning Network comes in. And as you know, because you've been in some of our meetings, we've got a group we started called the Chief Lightning Officers, where we're just simply trying to educate merchants and owners whose margins are under attack anyway, that there's this new set of monetary rails that are actually allow you to settle faster and are less expensive, which means if your margins are 10%, and instead of someone paying by credit card, 4% of which gets eaten up, only maybe 1% gets eaten up because you're using an entirely native digital set of rails. So this community, the explosion of companies is so vast. Charlie, I mean, you and I both are big fans of Elise Colleen, who's with Stillmark. There are Bitcoin-only venture capital firms. There are so many Lightning companies developing this technology around the world. And the thing about it is, so the US banking system is a bunch of closed rails. If it were a highway system, there'd be a toll booth every mile. It'd be a different company collecting, and there'd be more than one company collecting between point A and point B. Versus Lightning, if it were, again, a network, it's global, it's interoperable, meaning if you've got a developer in Africa that comes up with a cool solution, we can use it here in Colorado. It's just a function of adapting it. And there's so much brain power working on it that probably no one knows about. You know, I think venture capital in Silicon Valley tends to think if they're not doing it, it must not be happening. That's just an arrogant, kind of financially privileged way of looking at the world. And that's fine. I mean, that's kind of predictable. But there's an explosion of companies. It's almost, I've described it, I think you've heard me say this. To me, it's like it's like Legos. You could put it together in a million different ways. But all of this technology in the Lightning Network is trying to adapt to the person. So this community is developers, it's marketers, it's everybody, and they're trying to adapt it to how people want to be able to use a payment system to make it better, faster, cheaper, with no chargebacks. And it is just, it's dizzying. I literally can spend all day trying to study every single company that I learn of, and I literally am not able to do it, which is one reason why I started that group.
Yeah, the infographic I sent you, I was shocked at how many there were. And there were
absolutely
probably at least 100 on there.
Oh yeah, well, I'll bet it's numbered in the thousands. There's an incubator in New York City started by Ross Stevens, and I was actually there in August of last year when he made the announcement that he was starting this incubator. And he's literally saying, hey, look, we want your poor, your tired, your huddled masses who are willing to build on the Lightning Network. Please apply. And if you get accepted, you become part of a cohort. And they literally work in person in a skyscraper in downtown or midtown Manhattan. Mm-hmm. And they are creating new solutions to problems that are happening so rapidly that it becomes very difficult to keep up with it all. But that's a good thing. That goes back to your question about community. To me, the thing that makes it so amazing is that the number of developers in this space it's actually impossible, I think, to even quantify.
Absolutely. And just think of all the jobs that it's creating, which is great.
An incredible amount. And the beautiful part of it is, Charlie, even if you and I don't really have the chops, I could probably hire someone to develop a very specific, unique tweak to something that's already out there because it's free and open source. What that means is it's not closed source. All of the US banking system is closed sourced. MasterCard, Visa, any of the major banks, Western Union, you name it, Venmo, Zelle, right? I can't send money from Venmo to Zelle or Zelle to Venmo. And so the community here is amazing. I think the community in Africa is even more mind-blowing, and they have a bigger problem than we do. Believe it or not, there are 2,000 payment systems in the continent are on the continent of Africa, and only 2 or 3% of them talk to each other. So think about that. That's a form of, Ray Youssef calls it financial apartheid, but it's just patently unfair, and it's a way to maintain what I would call, or actually I think Alex Gladstein calls, monetary colonialism, because it allows the person in control of the money to control the people who are using the money. Well, that's true here in the United States. It's just not as bad as it is in Africa.
We just call it monetary censorship.
Right. But that community exists as strongly there. In fact, testament to that, I don't know if I told you this or not, I actually did a presentation with a group of about 35 people from a company called BitNob, which is based in Nigeria. And I did essentially a training session with them last Friday and just had a blast with it. But anything that they come up with might be utilized or used here in the United States. And because it's interoperable, you've got potentially 8 billion people all working on this free and open source software, specifically on the Lightning Network, because that's where the user friendliness comes in. And it gets really exciting to think about the possibilities because of this community of rabid. I mean, I've tried to describe the community, people. I don't know how to do it. Maybe you have a better idea. I've tried to say it's like having an alumni group that's the most rabid alumni you've ever known times 100. Like that's like some people view it as a religion, at least the Bitcoin, community. It's literally looked at almost like a religion. It's truly astonishing.
Yeah. And if people take the time to dig into it, you'll see how catchy this is. And again, with repetition, you'll hear things a different way where you're like, whoa, that makes a lot of sense. I better start getting involved. Share a couple, the energy company that you're talking about, and then maybe one other example, and then we'll kind of close with the middle school thing.
Yeah. Well, Vespine Energy, I'm trying to think where I put that. Is actually what they're doing is they're actually going to the landfills around the country. I think if we could capture all the methane gas released in landfills in just the United States, we'd have a meaningful impact on climate change. And there's a company called Vespine that's actually working on that very issue. And the beauty of it is you don't have to build out. The problem with most cases where you've got methane is you have to have pipelines to go somewhere. No, this is bringing the miner to the molecule is the phrase. And so Vespine is just one of those companies. Very exciting. There's a lot of them. Is
that the one you're sending?
No, that's Synota. So the other one, one that you're actually thinking about is called Synota, Synota, Synota. And what they want to do is go to energy companies and Bitcoin mining companies, and they have technology and they've done studies. One of the guys that founded it, even in college, studied the inefficiencies in payment systems, which is why we've been talking about Lightning. And he realized that probably the average energy bill that you and I pay is at least 10% higher because of the inefficiencies in the payment systems, which means our energy bill would go down by 10% if you could wring out the inefficiencies. Well, you can't really do that with US dollars and the fiat banking rails. What he's proposing to do is to use the Lightning Network to have energy go in this direction and sats, which is the unit of Bitcoin, going in that direction in real time with no lag, which eliminates these payment inefficiencies. And just another example, it's not really an energy related one. If you ran a restaurant and you were in a high inflation, price change inflation country, and you wanted to pay your employees every day, that is so easy to do with a Lightning Network and incredibly expensive to do with any of the other banking systems that exist anywhere in the world, that it is truly the future of, again, money over internet protocol. Those are just a couple of examples.
Yeah, thank you.
They're amazing.
Let's talk about a real world example where we had fun with some children at middle school.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
that
that
was
was
your
really,
baby. Thank you for inviting me along. So
oh, it was great to have you. Well, and
yeah.
you got to experience the exciting part. So what we did, it was two parts. One, in a classroom, a fellow person who works with me, Anthony and I, basically were invited to speak to a sequence of classes in the 7th and 8th grade. I think there were 4 separate groups that came in and out that day, and we taught them about money, a little bit about banking, and then a little bit about Bitcoin. And then we downloaded a Moon wallet onto the teacher's phone, and we told everyone that we're going to have the pop-up, which basically was like a science fair, only they were selling things, whether it was cupcakes or, haircuts or something else. And so the following week, these merchants, these entrepreneurs who had, the beauty of Bitcoin is it's complicated as hell to understand how it works and why it works. It is ridiculously simple to use the technology. Mm-hmm. So in under probably 5 minutes, we showed the class how to download a wallet, how to get Bitcoin on there. And we actually gave them $5 of Bitcoin so that everybody that wanted to could then go to any of the places that were in the gym, and they could actually use that to buy whatever they wanted. And of course, you saw it, all right? It's just amazing to watch how easy it was for them to use the technology. And I mean, they were just, I think they were blown away. And of course, we had a blast doing it. I was blown away at some level because it's like, wow, I'm used to dealing with people in my peer group, and they're scratching their heads about QR codes. These kids, it's like breathing, right? They're like, oh, okay. And they figured out that technology really, really cool. What was your impression? Because you obviously got to observe it as well.
Yeah. And that was really the bonus to me, because it was all about the kids and being entrepreneurs, having little mini businesses. Because the other half of that was their school got sponsored, and each of the kids who wanted to start a business was staked with $50 to launch their own little business. And like you said, there was a little mini barber. He didn't have time to do a full haircut, but he did designs in the kids' heads. I have a couple trinkets from there.
That's right. You were good about buying stuff. Yep. I think we both bought a cupcake. It was delicious, by the way.
Oh, yes.
A homemade cupcake, no less.
And the kid whose dad was an electrician, and he figured out how to twist wire together and make little animals. Yeah. But they were all scorpions there, which I have one, and my kids think is really cool. And the other one that did really well was the guy who had sneakers that were the air freshener for the car.
Right.
I mean, just like real business world, some of the kids like sold out and probably had over $100 worth of sats in their wallet, and some did okay.
Yeah, and again, I think the important thing, hopefully, that people can take away from today's session is it's ridiculously easy to use this technology if someone will just show you. And once you use it, I've used it enough now. I would rather, for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is not running any risk of my identity being stolen. Like when I use a credit card, there's all kinds of identity theft problems. And with Bitcoin, there's no chance of that. It's better, faster, cheaper. It settles quicker. And it's just truly astonishing. And to see the look on those kids' faces, and even one or two of the teachers. So I actually had one or two of the teachers download the wallet, the Moon wallet, and I gave them some sats. And I said, now think about this. Did you give them your name? No. How about your address? No. How about your social security number? No. How about your phone number? No. How about your email address? No. And all of a sudden you could see this one teacher. She's like, wow. I said, so can you do that at a local bank? No. Right? You have to give all kinds of identity. And while there are plenty of people in the government, in the banking system, who will insist that's for our good, I've been a banking lawyer long enough, and I've been in the market long enough to know maybe that was true 100 years ago. Yeah. I don't think that's true today. And the beauty of it, as you know, I'm actually the co-author of a document which is saying we need to separate money from state, not do away with the dollar,
Mm-hmm.
I hope that sticks around for a long time. But have an alternative to the dollar, and the only one to me that makes any sense, because of some of the reasons we talked about earlier, the immutable ledger, the fact that there's a fixed supply, it's also a very predictable monetary system, is Bitcoin.
Got 1 minute.
Right. But it's Bitcoin and the Bitcoin protocol.
So wrap it up with what you wanted to share.
Well, yeah, I mean, just for those of you who want to go and, sign something online, it's called the Declaration of Monetary Independence. And if you go to declarationofmonetaryindependence.org, you can sign it electronically. There will also be at Bitcoin 2023 an 8-foot by 10-foot version of this that will be available for physical signing. So if those of you who are coming, would love to see you there, and hope all of you will join the peaceful revolution if you haven't already.
Right. Perfect. Thank you. I'm grateful for you being my Bitcoin mentor, Mark. And thanks.
It's been my pleasure. It's been fun.
All right. You take care.
All right. You too.